Greetings from the Port of Los Angeles. I'm Chelsea Boyd with the Port's media team. On behalf of Philip Sandfield and our staff, thank you for being with us today. Joining me is Jean Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you, Chelsea, and welcome here today. Philip's a little bit under the weather, but on the mend. And Philip, we can't wait for you to be back on deck here. Great to be with everyone again from the media for another monthly update. We're pleased to have a guest with us who has unique insights into the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing around the globe. Ed Desmond is the Executive Vice President of the Toy Association, which represents more than 950 toy companies with a U.S. presence. I've worked with Ed for a number of years and looking forward to a timely and important discussion in just a few minutes.
Now, as we normally do, let's begin with our monthly review of the Port's August cargo volume and take a look ahead. Jean, you estimated August would come in at about 950,000 TEUs, and that estimate was spot on.
Yes, Chelsea, that's right where we predicted. August was another exceptional month. We landed at just over 954,000 TEUs, as you noted. Our Port Optimizer data, combined with Damian Young and our staff expertise, is key to our forecasting. There are multiple variables at play each month, particularly now as we factor anchorage and dwell times. And this is why we believe it's important to offer monthly forecasts, to assist all stakeholders to prepare for incoming cargo. Compared to August of 2020, which was a record month for us, we came in with a similar performance this August. The Port of LA welcomed 84 container vessels to berth, including 11 extra loaders. However, 26 vessels were at anchor at the end of August, including some of the new entrants with smaller ships. About 205,000 TEUs are on these vessels in particular, and will be processed this month at the Port of Los Angeles. For the month of August, we continue to average an exchange rate per vessel of more than 11,300 TEUs. That's the best in the business for loading and unloading containers. And we average nearly 16 ships a day at berth in August. That's 60% more berth activity compared to pre-pandemic times. While there are many challenges ahead of us to tackle, and we will do so, I'm extremely proud of the work being done by all our partners, from the ILWU Longshore and everyone else across the supply chain.
Jean, let's look inside the August numbers and zero in on imports, exports, and empties. Anything unexpected?
Chelsea, no real surprises this month. Imports remain strong. Exports continue their 3-year struggle, and empties are at record highs. Specifically on imports, we see a 6% year-on-year decline for the month. That's because last August, retailers were really beginning to ramp up on imports to restock shelves after the initial wave of the pandemic-induced buying surge that began last year. The big picture is that imports remain strong. Please remember, we'll now be comparing against big numbers from the second half of last year. Unfortunately, exports continue to lag. Although we did manage to break the 100,000 TEU mark for the first time since May of this year, that's not much to celebrate. Exports are down 23% compared to last August. The ratio of imports to exports came in at 4.8 to 1, a slight improvement versus last month. This graph is telling. Look at the decline in U.S. exports out of our largest gateway here in Los Angeles since 2018. Exports are now down 30 of the last 34 months. The drop coincides with many issues that we've highlighted before. We must get our exporters back in the game. We've made some very solid recommendations to the Biden administration, including creating the right incentives to start turning around these numbers quickly. Conversely, empty containers continue to climb, and you would expect that with the rising imports that we've seen over the past year plus. We finished August delivering more than 367,000 empty TEUs, a 17% jump compared to last August. That's more empties than we've ever processed in 1 month, beating the previous high that was set just back in May by 1,000 TEUs.
We are just a couple of weeks away from the all-important fourth quarter. Give us a snapshot of where we're at and what things look like ahead.
Driven by the ongoing American buying surge, we're having an exceptional 2021, up more than 30% during the first 8 months of the year. We've already processed almost 7.3 million container units, and it looks like this trend will continue straight through year 2022. Our signal data, which is updated daily, shows strong volume in the next 3 weeks headed here to Los Angeles. Accounting for the Anchorage situation, we're expecting about 930,000 TEUs in the month of September, compared to about 880,000 last year at that time. For October, our initial forecast comes in at 950,000 TEUs. Last October, as an example, Los Angeles processed more than 980,000 container units, which is our second best month all time. For the full year, we're now estimating 10.8 million 20-foot equivalent units, and if achieved, that would be a 14% increase over 2018, which was our best calendar year performance in the port's 114-year history. As you may recall, we finished our most recent fiscal year on June 30th with a 12-month record of almost 10.9 million TEUs, and there's a very good chance that we'll exceed that number for the calendar year here in 2021. Of course, we continue to monitor a host of variables. Disruptions continue at every node in the supply chain. The issues are being addressed by Los Angeles here in the public and private sector with stakeholders at the highest levels.
Gene, one more topic before we bring in Ed Desmond. You've talked about the daily operations report that the port produces for internal use. Can you walk us through today's snapshot?
Yeah, that's right, Chelsea. Every morning before our 0900 staff meeting here at the Harbor Administration Building, Mike DiBernardo and his team put out a daily snapshot of what's taking place on the port. Today, for example, we have 18 container vessels in port, including one that is idling for repairs. We also categorize the other segments of cargo ships and crews that are sitting here awaiting entry. Right now and today, we have 60 container vessels at anchor or drifting. 29 of those are headed right here to Los Angeles. And over the next 3 days, we have an additional 20 container ships coming to the San Pedro Bay, 13 of which are destined for the Port of LA. We also look very closely at our terminal updates and what productivity looks like. Today, as an example, we have 55 labor gangs out on the docks working, and only 3 were cut. That means we have a little more maneuverability on our terminal tarmacs to move cargo in and out the gates, on and off the ships. Dwell times are also an area of particular importance to us. Dwell time for containers on terminal is reached its peak of 6 days since this surge began. The dwell time on the street is at 8.5 days, nearing the all-time high, and that's the amount of time containers and chassis sit awaiting for warehouse space on the street or the privilege of bringing the empty container along with the trailer wheels back to the marine terminal setting. Our dwell time for on-dock rail has come down just a bit at 11.7 days from the all-time high. Much more work is happening there with our Western Railroad partners and PHL here locally in Los Angeles. We're also seeing that on-dock rail containers waiting to be loaded is nearly 8,000 units. That's about 4 times what it should be at this juncture. But as we've been since the pandemic started, all gate, rail, and vessel operations are happening today at all terminals across the Port of Los Angeles.
Thanks for that overview. Gene, would you like to welcome our guest?
It's my pleasure, Chelsea, to introduce Ed Desmond of the Toy Association. Good to see you again, Ed.
Great to see you, Gene, and thank you so much for inviting me to this important session. And as you mentioned early on, we've had the pleasure of working with you and your team out there for many, many years now, and our industry really thanks you and your team for the help over those years. And we'll continue to face these issues together and hopefully find solutions for all of us.
Thanks, Ed. And that's right. We really do pride ourselves in working with the executives and the members of the Toy Association during these uncharted times. We speak with the Toy Association on a regular basis, and of course, Ed, we're always happy to continue the dialogue in a setting like this, so our partners in the media can have a first-hand account of what the association is doing and how it supports the membership.
We appreciate the opportunity to share the story.
Ed, give us a rundown of the association and its members, your mission, and how you're going about work in this very difficult time.
Sure, Gene, happy to. Well, our association is 105 years old. As you mentioned, we represent about 950 companies. And something that's important to know about our industry and our association as we talk through these issues, 95% of our nearly 1,000 members are small businesses. So when we talk about the impact of this crisis, it really hits home with the vast majority of our members. In terms of an annual economic impact, we have an impact in the U.S. of about $97 billion. That translates to about 630,000 full-time American jobs. And we sell about 3 billion toys a year in the U.S. Again, a little background on why this issue is so important to us. Of those 3 billion toys that are sold in this country, 85% of them come from China. So you can see the dependence and reliance our industry has to get their products over here and on the shelves in stores here. Lastly, just from an industry snapshot, it's been a rough few years for our industry. The closure of Toys R Us a few years ago, the threat of China tariffs the last few years, obviously trying to work through COVID, and now this shipping situation has really challenged our industry in unique ways, as it has hit many other consumer products industries. But we continue to thrive, we continue to work through it, and working with our public policymakers all through here in Washington, where I'm based, as well as some of our private, entities. We're continuing to try to face this situation head on and help our member companies.
Outstanding. And I know, Ed, that your members are focused now on all the supply chain disruptions, trying to tie together lead times and work very closely with this all-important holiday season. Are there any insights you have on unique strategies being employed right now by your members?
Well, Gene, again, because of the difference in our member size, the larger members of ours have an annual working relationship with the shippers, with the retailers, and they can weather this storm, still being impacted, but they can weather this storm fairly well when we talk relatively speaking. It's really the small members and the small companies that are facing the brunt of this impact. They really don't have the leverage or the size to have those annual contracts. So they're the ones that are really feeling the brunt of this and are facing the most concern heading in to the important holiday season. Our companies have faced between 500 and 800% increases in container fees. What might used to cost a company $3,000, maybe that's manageable with small and medium companies. It's now costing $24,000 to $25,000. And that's just too much for one of our small companies to bear. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. In terms of strategies, Gene, our message is to consumers, get out and buy toys now. We've had this message out as families, other consumers began getting into the back to school shopping. While you're in those stores, if you see toys that you think your kids are going to want for Christmas, or if your grandparents, maybe your grandkids want for Christmas, pick them up now and tuck them away and make sure that you have them. We do have a good supply right now. Large retailers do a reset around Labor Day. So the stores right now have a pretty healthy supply. So if you're out there, consumers, now's the time to buy. We just don't know what's going to happen down the road as we get closer to Christmas.
Right. And Ed, we've reported to the media and to others in many discussions that online sales have nearly doubled in the retail sector across the United States over the past 12 months or so, what took a decade to build. And I know this is an important component of your membership's activities.
It really is. We are a membership not just of manufacturers but of retailers as well. So the Walmarts and Targets and Amazon are all members of ours and sit on our board. So we have a very close relationship with these retailers. They all now have online presence. And what our message is to consumers, when you're in a brick and mortar store, you can read the product, you can see what it's all about. Make sure it's got its testing requirements met on the packaging. Do the same thing when you're online. There's a lot of counterfeit products and unsafe products. And one of the concerns, Gene, that we have now is that if there aren't the products in stores, then consumers may go on some of these sites. And maybe they're not the most reputable sites, some of the other places where you can buy products. And we're really concerned that they may pick up some of these low-cost, untested, unsafe products. So we really advocate, whether you shop in a brick and mortar store or online, please check out those products you're buying and make sure they're safe.
And that's so important to understand as well, Ed, because we know a lot of the work you do in the association and with the membership is around the health and safety of your consumers, producers, and the toys that you sell throughout the nation. So I really appreciate those comments. And Ed, if you have just a couple of moments to stay with us, I'm sure the media will have some questions for you here this afternoon.
Our first question today comes for Ed from Lisa Bartline of Reuters. She asks, how are U.S. toy makers set for holiday inventory? Will they be rushing in goods through the remainder of the year, or has much of it already arrived?
Well, thank you for your question, Lisa. Yeah, as I mentioned, right now there is a pretty significant supply of toys, which is, again, why we're advocating that people try to get out there soon. We are continuing to hear from our members that they're continuing to get shipments in. And I think the major retailers will be in a good position. What we might see, though, is a lack of variety. There may not be the breadth of choice of toys. So there's no certainty that if your child or the children in America are looking for a particular toy, that it will be around. And the other thing to remember is what's so important in our industry are the small Main Street toy stores. We are advocating to consumers to keep going into those stores. Ask the owners, ask the proprietors, are they having shipments expected so that they can go back and continue to frequent and make purchases from those small stores. So we do see a supply right now. If people go out in those major retailers, they will see the toy shelves pretty well stocked. We don't know how long that will last. We're certainly hoping that more containers come in, both for the major retailers and to help some of these small stores. But one issue that we do fear is you may not see the same breadth of selection heading into the fall shopping season.
We have a follow-up question, Ed, from Lisa as well. Are any toy companies using air freight versus ocean now? How has that impacted overall transportation plans?
We have heard of a couple that are exploring air freight. Obviously, it's a faster mode of getting product to the U.S., but it is, our understanding, 10 to 15 times more expensive. And obviously, you'd have to make many flights to equal what you might be able to get over in a couple of containers on a ship. So it's not something that we're seeing very widespread at all. Obviously, it's been explored and it might be used by a couple of our companies, but the costs are exorbitant, again, which largely impacts the vast majority of our members.
Our next question is for Gene. It comes from Greg Miller at FreightWaves. In July, UP and BNSF decided to temporarily throttle back rail service to help clear the terminal at Joliet. In Los Angeles and Long Beach, is there any way through communications between terminals and carriers to temporarily throttle back inbound transpacific volume, allowing more time for terminals to dig out?
Good to hear from you, Greg, and thanks for joining us today. And a great question. There is a big difference between a train moving from Los Angeles to Chicago carrying 280 to 300 containers versus a ship, as I've said, on average, which is exchanging 11,300 container units. Slowing down these ships is something we thought about in the early days of the surge to try to give us a little bit of space here between the work on the terminal that's needed, the grooming of those properties, and then getting ready for the next ship to come in. But when you start looking at slowing down these ships, it's going to back up the vessel part of the supply chain even further. Getting some spacing and distance is important, but as you well know and we've talked about before, once a vessel has completed its work at berth and is headed back to Asia, we've got another one right behind it 3 miles away. So there's really no distance in between. Our vessels right now are waiting at anchor a little more than 8 days. So backing that up even further throws the schedules off into a deeper concern for the liner shipping companies. We're going to continue to try to squeeze out every hour of productivity that we can, using some ideas that are already in place, and the fact that if we can speed up container velocity, so long as it's in a safe environment for our workers, that's going to start to ease these nodal bottlenecks. We'll keep you apprised, but thank you again for the question.
Our next question is for Ed. It comes from Niraj Chokshi of the New York Times. Are manufacturers having trouble sourcing materials, getting products on vessels, finding space in warehouses? What awaits us this holiday season?
Well, thank you. That's an important question. And the answer is yes to all of those issues. As Gene alluded to early on in the presentation, it's no single problem issue. There are just so many things to address, whether it is the lack of workers in China due to COVID, the lack of containers, the inability to get the containers on ships, coming over to whether it's the LA port or another part of the country, running into some of the problems here, whether it's, again, a lack of workers due to COVID or chassis and trucks or other rail distribution issues, getting to warehouses. That's why we continue to search for solutions, because there is no single answer to this global problem. We continue to work at all of the issues that were part of your question. Another component of this problem is the American manufacturers who can't source some of their materials and components and get those over here for those who make their products here in the U.S. A particular member of ours contacted me recently. They make a number of plastic toys and products for kids. They can't get resin anywhere. And that's just one example of an American manufacturer. So we have the manufacturers trying to get finished product from China. We also have the American manufacturers who are having trouble sourcing components and materials to make their products here in the U.S.
Our next question comes from Scott Horsley at NPR. This is for Gene. A recent manufacturing report suggests that unfinished goods are building up in inventories because they're 99% complete but missing a critical part. Are you hearing from importers in that position that there's a multiplier effect where a delayed container of X creates a cascade of other delays down the line? And if so, what do you tell them?
Thanks for joining, Scott. And we hear this every day, working very closely with our manufacturing community, the automotive OEMs, and their tiered suppliers. Give you an example of a company who builds cars. They've got parts, components, and peripherals coming in from all over the world. And the synchronization of those parts arriving at the manufacturing facility is absolutely imperative to the design, development, and delivery of those automobiles. We've talked much about the silicon chips that go into cars in the new brains of an automobile. Those being in finite demand now have caused for production delays and in some cases the shuttering of plants in particular models until they can get the chip inventory going. So we've been working in this space for a long time, well aware of how important each component is to the finished product. And just for perspective, about 20% of the Port of LA's imports are parts, peripherals, and components for the manufacturing and automotive sectors. Absolutely important to us. We're working as if it's a triage situation. We're asking these companies and their facilities to give us a list of their containers in priority fashion. Our Mike DiBernardo, Eric Harris, Chris Chase, and Marcel Van Dyke are working directly with the terminal operators and shipping lines to rush that product through and get it out to those manufacturing facilities. It's a lot of hard work, but we understand what's on the line here. Thanks, Scott.
This question is for Ed. It comes from Michael Giuliano from Tradewinds. Are toy manufacturers considering chartering entire box ships or partial deck space in an effort to address supply chain disruptions like retailers Home Depot and Walmart have?
Yeah, some of our members, I mean, Walmart was mentioned in the question. They are a member. I know a couple of the other retailers are looking into those kind of shared situations and charter situations. Again, we're looking at every possible solution or avenue to get through these next few months and get products here and on the shelves of these stores.
And here's another question from Michael for Jean. As we know, a major reason for the congestion is importers not picking up the boxes fast enough from the port. Are importers trying to do anything to speed up the pickup process?
Thanks, Michael. And the answer is yes. We've got importers across the board, big and small. As you may remember, there are more than 200,000 companies that utilize the Port of Los Angeles on an annual basis, and no one company has more than a 5% market share. So it is not a situation where we can manage the bulk of 80% of our business and then focus on the 20 that need the most assistance. Everybody needs that care. And that's why we've been promoting digitization so much. Not only to understand what's coming at us, but how to make exception management possible. Aggregating all this data so we can speed decision making, whether you're a trucking firm, a Western Railroad, a broker forwarder here in Southern California. The quicker you can get to action by the aggregation of data that the Port of Los Angeles provides as a service to you, the quicker you can execute your operations. So what we're seeing right now is an all-out effort from the steamship lines to the terminal operators, trucking firms, railroads, and ourselves here at the Port of Los Angeles to work with the importers. Some simply cannot ingest as much cargo as they've ordered into the domestic supply chain. Others have had challenges in the last mile, getting from that local warehouse onto the store shelf. As I've reported to you previously, our 2 billion square feet of warehousing from the shores of the Pacific out to the desert region are overflowing. We need more workers on the job. We probably need expanded hours to match up with the work that's being done in other segments of the supply chain. So all of this is a concerted effort, and I'm really proud to report everybody, for the most part, seems to be pulling in the same direction to find answers. I had a dear friend who works for a big retailer in the hobby industry contact me the other day, desperately looking for containers that were in a closed area of a terminal. Our Chris Chase has been on the case. We've elevated where these containers are in the management structure, and we're rifling through every container to get these boxes out. Now, there are some who are not picking up the boxes as swiftly as we would like, and as evidenced by our dwell times that continue to increase, we're taking them one at a time and working through all of these companies to make sure that we create fluidity in the supply chain and continue to decrease the amount of time that the cargo is sitting at one particular node. There's much work ahead of us, but we've highlighted and understand the situations, work in the relationships that I've said are all important to getting this done.
Jean, this comes from Ron White of the LA Times. How long should consumers expect to wait for back-ordered products? We've heard anecdotal reports of up to a year. Is that common these days or an outlier situation?
Hello, Ron, and glad the Times could join us for this press conference. I can't tell you. As a U.S. consumer, there are certain products I get on a regular basis, others I wait a little longer for. My online buying habits seem to be working in the right direction. I've level set my expectations on lead times, not only from reports through the media, but what I've been seeing on the ground. We've reported earlier during the surge of import cargo that we've seen a lot of household appliances, furniture, outdoor goods, as well as athletic and athleisure wear. Products like golf clubs and tennis rackets are coming in big numbers because while gyms were closed, those were the things we went back and did once again. Maybe in some cases like mine, after many years away from the game of golf, I enjoyed it again. But what we're seeing is the unevenness of the supply chain. Factory output in Asia is at its highest in recorded history, yet there are still back orders. 99.5% of all vessels are deployed, and specifically here in the transpacific trade, we've seen extra loaders by incumbent carriers and no less than 10 new entrants to the trade. increasing vessel capacity to handle this once-in-a-lifetime surge in demand that we've witnessed. So with everybody trying to get on the ground and in sync with each other, we're doing our level best. But for anecdotal information around waiting a year for a product without the details, I really can't comment any further. Yet, it's important for us as American consumers to keep fueling this economy and understanding what's out there and how long we need to wait given the various or omni-channel distribution network our supply chain has. Ron, thanks again for joining.
This next question comes from Stas Margaronis of the American Journal of Transportation. The Agriculture Transportation Coalition and other U.S. agricultural exporters have written to President Biden expressing concern about cutbacks in export bookings by ocean carriers. This is happening just as the harvest has begun, thus threatening the livelihoods of American farmers. What can be done to help U.S. agricultural exporters increase ocean carrier bookings from California ports?
Thanks, Stas. Appreciate you joining once again this month. As you well know, I have been a long time and strong advocate of the American farmer and the agricultural sector, including forestry products. We've worked extremely close with the Agricultural Transportation Coalition, led by Peter Friedman, and others as part of the agriculture community, including the Soybean and Specialty Grain Council. The work here is probably the biggest challenge our industry faces. As I've commented before, much of our finished goods that come by way of imports go to metropolitan areas where many consumers live. And much of our exports emanate from rural America, where we see farming communities, manufacturers broadly, and even those surrounding the automotive industry. Our shipping and services industries really work on round-trip economics, how we can bring imports in and circle those exports back to Asia. Again, that trade gap allows for a certain amount of empty containers to reposition to capture that next round of imports. But triangulating these economics is the biggest challenge. Trying to find a way to get an empty container, chassis, and truck power from the Chicago area up to the Red River Valley of North Dakota to load up with soybeans or number 5 red wheat has been an elusive solution to all of us. The repositioning costs are extraordinarily high and only exacerbated with this import buying surge that we've witnessed and, unfortunately, the trade policy that carried over from the last administration. And this is part of the reason why we're talking across stakeholder groups and trying to get big thinkers at the table on how we can do this. In fact, Peter Friedman recommended that we worked on near port locations of agricultural supply where we can turn these empty containers in 12, 24 hours, get them back to port for the first acceptance day possible, and load to an export vessel. So there are creative ideas coming from the membership as well as leadership across the agricultural sector that we want to take a swing at and employ, whether it be on a trial or pilot basis, prove the concept, and again, having that information early and sharing it across stakeholder groups can only help us be more intuitive and execute on these platforms better than we've done before. But Stas, we'll keep you updated on this. This is one of the most important pieces of work that we face today. Thanks.
Gene, a few reporters have asked about work being done by the public and private sector to address supply chain issues. Any details that you can share?
The latest round of talks started this summer when Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg hosted a panel discussion via Zoom on July 15th. Since then, the Port of LA has co-hosted 2 San Pedro Bay supply chain solutions meetings. First, a roundtable on August 30th with about 60 participants and a smaller working group discussion just this past Friday, September 10th. With about 16 folks in attendance, we talked about all issues related to getting work done on the ground. John Porcari, recently appointed port envoy, joined both of these meetings. Our main objective is to identify actions to minimize disruptions in the supply chain affecting our nation's transportation work. So we've created working groups in 3 key areas. First, truck appointments and equipment, understanding the availability and positioning of chassis, empty container returns, rail car usage, engine power, and better management of unused truck appointments. Second, cost structures. rising detention and demurrage concerns, inflation created by bottlenecks in the supply chain, and other issues brought about in this area. And then thirdly, long-term competitiveness, in particular looking to improve land use, an export strategy or policy, as I've talked about before, and workforce training and development. We believe that we've got to get folks trained, upskilled, and reskilled in safe environments like a workforce training and development center we're planning here in Los Angeles. With so much cargo moving for this elongated period of time, it's tough to train folks right on those marine terminals. Yet great credit goes to the ILWU and Pacific Maritime Association for the training they've done on skilled crane folks as well as others during this surge. We've had extensive discussions, and there are no easy answers, but the groups are reporting back to us daily on what can get done as quickly as possible.
Our next question is for Ed. It comes from Jeff Berman of Logistics Management. What are the biggest changes in terms of approaching and preparing for peak season in 2021 compared to 2020? For your members, given how the myriad of supply chain challenges we've seen remain in effect?
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. I think one of the changes is that we're going to see people out shopping more in the retail stores as opposed to last year where maybe they were not prepared to do that. So I do think we may see more people out. And as I mentioned, the stores right now, it's a great time to go and shop for toys. I think there's 12 super categories, we call them, of toys. For example, a category might be action figures or outdoor toys. Right now, 10 of 11 of those super categories are up in sales. So the industry, despite all of these challenges, has found ways to keep going and building. So I think, one change might be people are actually out in the stores, in the toy aisles, purchasing their toys there instead of mostly online, perhaps during the height of the pandemic last year. So that's one way. Also, I think it's important for consumers to know that despite these challenges, we're only seeing modest price increases. So again, it's a good time to go out and look for those products, tuck them away in your house until Christmas and surprise the kids with them. And you're not going to see toys with significant markups and things like that. Again, a lot of our companies have relationships with retailers where the prices are set and they're not going to be able to raise them. So we've only seen modest increases. So again, I think right now in the near future and hopefully further down through the shopping season, you'll see the toys on the shelves and you hopefully find what you're looking for.
We have a follow-up question from Jeff for Jean. While consumer spending levels remain solid, supply chain throughput issues remain challenging, to be sure coupled with many industry experts advising consumers to buy holiday gifts earlier than usual. Do you think that will impact inbound cargo flows over the next 2 months in a meaningful way?
Thanks, Jeff, and good to have you with us again. It remains to be seen, but it can only help. If we continue to cycle inventory out to the consumer through the various omni-channel methods, we have the ability to get that last mile going. And that backs up to the regional DC, and then the rail hub in the Midwest allows us to move more frequent trains out from the port and maybe releases some of the pressure on our marine terminals so we have more maneuverability to bring in the next ship and work it. The ships at anchor can then flow in a little more quickly than they are right now, sitting at about 8+ days. So all of us are interconnected. The orders that are coming stem from us as the American consumer, buying more than we ever have. And now we've got the intersection of that strong consumer demand with our year-end holiday peak season. An early Lunar New Year will also mean that cargo will continue to flow at relatively high levels even after most of our inventory lands on U.S. shores for the Christmas and holiday season. So the answer to your question is yes, I believe it will. It remains to be seen how impactful, and we're looking at all those metrics, talking with folks every day, again, to squeeze every hour of productivity, not only out of this port, but all nodes of the supply chain. Very great question, Jeff. Appreciate you joining.
Jean, this question comes from Paul Berger of the New York Times. Given the ongoing congestion at the port, do you worry that some carriers or shippers might decide to take their business elsewhere?
Well, Paul, we're very competitive by nature, and as I've shared many times before, we've lost 20% of our market share since about the early 2000s. Folks in the import sectors began to look at four corners and port diversification strategies. Those ports hired some of the best in the business, aligned themselves with policymakers, and have invested great sums of money to make their ports best in class in their regions. I've also said that over the past decade, the U.S. government and Congress has outinvested the West Coast ports at a rate of 11-1 versus our contemporaries on the East and Gulf Coast, and that has to change. A timely conversation now that we're talking about reconciliation budgets and the infrastructure plan. We're going to be working to make sure folks understand that investment needs to lead to the greatest economic good and return for the United States of America, and all roads lead to Los Angeles. We've got to help ourselves competitively. We're seeing with this cargo flow, we've got the best in the business, the best quality of worker on the dockside. We've got the most institutional knowledge in our supply chain, I believe, right here in Southern California and the partners that we work with. So we'll be continuing to challenge that every day, but it's a question that's front of mind for us always. Thanks, Paul.
Gene, we'll wrap up with one last question here. Tom Quimby, senior editor at Commercial Carrier Journal, asks, are the China port closures over COVID still a concern? If so, what are the possible implications for the Port of Los Angeles?
Thanks for joining. All of the COVID issues are a concern for humanity, first and foremost, and for businesses across the world. A closure to a port or a semi-closure does impact, but as we've recounted, we saw the port of Yantian and those in Guangdong province, Shekau, etc., go down to about 50% of capacity for the balance of about 2 weeks. And then they bounced back and pick up the cargo again and started moving it. The most recent event in Ningbo, one of 4 terminals shut down. Cargo moved through the other terminals. And remember, we also said that Shanghai was only 3.5 hours away by truck. So we found ways to absorb that. We've seen outbreaks, third and fourth waves in Southeast Asia, Vietnam in particular at the factory level. We've got to continue vaccinations worldwide, and for developing nations, whether it's COVAX, the United States, or others who have surplus vaccines, we've got to keep distributing them to those nations that are in need today. This is going to be with us for some time. Every day, something happens in the supply chain that causes us to pivot, take notice, or adapt some way, somehow. And that's exactly what we're doing. Nothing's going to shut us down. We're going to keep the American economy moving, but we're going to be very mindful with our head on a swivel of what's happening in our own environments and around us overseas to make sure that we can meet the challenge every day. But again, great question, and thanks for joining, Paul.
That concludes our questions. Gene, I'll hand it back to you for closing thoughts.
Thank you, Chelsea. I'd like to share a brief update on the work that continues every day through Logistics Victory Los Angeles, or Love LA as we know it here. Since April of 2020, shortly after Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti asked me to serve concurrently as the city's first ever chief logistics officer, I've had the privilege of leading a group of dedicated port and city volunteers. We've successfully leveraged our logistics and purchasing expertise to get personal protective equipment to those in need throughout the region. And I'm pleased to report today that we now have provided at-cost sales of more than 10.2 million units of PPE to approximately 250 organizations, including hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and more recently, community colleges and small businesses. This includes everything from N95 masks, hospital gowns, gloves, hand sanitizer, along with other important medical supplies. And through many generous donors, we've also provided tens of thousands of PPE units free of charge. I'm so proud of the team that's continued to work behind the scenes for 18 months and counting. While there were many volunteers involved in this effort, I'd like to thank 3 senior port staffers, Aveen Sharma, David Libatique, and Erica Calhoun, for their leadership and commitment to this effort. And our own Chelsea Boyd, who is here with us today, was one of our charter volunteers. In addition to the work of our great city colleagues at the General Services Department, led by General Manager Tony Royster and Assistant General Manager John Trivgoda, they've been so important to our success. If there's an organization out there that needs supplies to make it through this pandemic, please reach out to us at lovela.org. That's lovela.org. We can help. In closing, thanks again to Ed Desmond for your time today, and my appreciation to the media for joining us as always. Chelsea, thank you for stepping in, and Philip, we'll see you soon. We look forward to being together with you at our next briefing. Until then, stay safe and take care, everyone.